I was 38 years old when my grandmother was killed. I mean, everybody loved her. She was just a very, very sweet person, the way grandma's supposed to be. She used to teach these Bible stories. They call them flannel graph Bible stories. When I speak to high school kids, I have to explain what a flannel graph Bible story is, and I talk about how it's an easel. There's a board with flannel material over it, and cut out pictures of Bible characters, and she would put these characters up on the flannel graph board and tell stories. It's what she loved to do. And so at the age of 78 years old, when these 4 girls knocked on her door and said they wanted to take her Bible lessons, it was one more chance for her to share her faith with young people. And she told the girls to come in. My grandmother turned her back to get some information on the Bible classes. One of the girls grabbed a vase off the end table, and when she fell to the floor, another girl pulled a knife out of her purse and began to stab her. She had been stabbed 33 times with a 12-inch butcher knife. They also had a section of the carpet had been underneath her body and showed how the carpet had been slashed by the knife. And they had a picture of the hardwood floor that was underneath the carpet and show how the hardwood floor had been splintered and bruised by that knife. In the state of Indiana, if you're 10 years old, you can be tried as an adult for certain crimes. And this crime fit into that category, so they said they were going to try all 4 girls as adults and seek the death penalty for all 4 girls. There was a period of time where there was no death penalty in this country, and that was fine with me. When it was reinstated again, that was also fine. I was willing to go along with whatever the law said.
The witnesses are now entering the witness room. All witnesses have arrived and have seated. The warden has entered the execution chamber at this time. He is walking unassisted, walks straight to the chair and has seated himself in it.
Have you got any reason why the execution shouldn't be carried out?
No, I don't. The hood is being placed on at this time. The superintendent has afforded the condemned an opportunity to make a last statement. He is not moving, he's just sitting there very passively staring out at the witnesses.
Ralph, this is Commissioner.
Yes, sir.
There are no stays. You can proceed to carry out the official order of the court.
Very well. On my count of 3, press your button. 1, 2, 3.
We are born into a world of paradox, mystery, and conflict, destined to remember the very instruments that connect us all: life, and eventually death. Millions of us have been exposed to images of capital punishment from a young age. Jesus, pre, during, and post-crucifixion. While most of us focused on the condemned, my focus was always on the soulless murderers depicted as his executioners. How could one man do this to another? Who are the men behind the masks? We've been killing each other since day 1 of our existence. Between 1976 and 2015, the United States has executed roughly 1,413 people. 3 by hanging, 3 by firing squad, 11 by gas chamber, 158 by electrocution, and 1,238 by lethal injection. The United States, statistically, is one of the top 5 countries conducting executions. Iraq, Saudi Arabia, Iran, and China being the others.
Public Information Officer for the Texas Department of Criminal Justice. The condemned arrives here at the Huntsville unit at an undisclosed time. I choose not to answer that question. I don't feel comfortable repeating your question. So the identities of the executioners in Texas is protected under law. and so those identities are not revealed, and that information is confidential.
My search for an executioner began with countless hours of online digging, which led me to an alarming trend of suicides among the executioners I could even find in the U.S. I had to assume there were others out there, shrouded in secrecy and suffering in silence.
Well, without any training, or never having been in a jail or a prison, I was offered the job of warden and superintendent of a maximum security prison. I had a master's in rehabilitation and a doctorate in counseling psychology. I had not thought anything about the death penalty, other than in, like most people, in some sort of abstract fashion. I went down to death row, and I have several friends who have had the same type of involvement that I have, who value life and respect life, and to take life is a whole different thing that they were trained for, or I was trained for, or conditioned to do. I know that I received letters and even phone calls from people who wanted to execute. But I don't want a bunch of sadists. I mean, is that what we want? Doing the killing? That just keeps reinforcing what we're trying to stop.
I eventually learned of 2 former executioners who were suing the very state they had served. I reached out to the attorney representing them, and after some encouragement on his part, they were willing to talk to me.
I would consider my childhood to be very normal, with elements of discipline in it that I thought was necessary, in order to mature. I felt like I had to mature really fast, though.
Didn't really have any idea what I wanted to do. As I grew up, I decided I wanted to become something in law enforcement.
In the Marine Corps, it's a very simple mission. You are taught that it's not your job to die for your country. It's your job to make the other person die for his.
I was infantry, 0311 infantry, and basically we were just the ground pounders that go in, like now in Iraq and that kind of thing, and fight on the ground.
I stayed in there for about 5 years. I originally wanted to go back. My mother gotten sick, and me being the only child, I stayed and helped her throughout some pretty hard times. I had family members that was already in the Department of Corrections working there, and I basically just followed that path.
Got back home and tried different odds and end type jobs. Started putting in for some law enforcement jobs. I went up through the ranks. Basically, I was an officer. Then I went from officer, back then it was, to assistant supervisor. And then I made lieutenant, and then I made captain.
I wanted major. It was a next progression for promotion for me.
So when I put in for the position of major, and he asked me, at the time, did I have any problem with, executions? And I felt like when he was asking me that, it was pretty much, if you say no, then you're not going to get this job that you've been, your whole life trying to get, that kind of thing.
I've always believed in crime and punishment at that particular stage of my thought process. And might I add, there was no place on the job description for major that said that I had to be an executioner.
About 2 or 3 weeks before the first lethal injection in the world, the warden called a staff meeting. So he came in and he sat down, took off his big cowboy hat and said, "We're going to have an execution." And then he got to me and he said, "You're going to be the chaplain, and your job is to seduce his emotions, because I don't want him to fight either coming out of the cell or crawling up on the gurney." And that was a shock. I had never, ever thought I'd be doing that, never. To keep him calm, like the warden wanted. And whatever that took, if it took a little thing like getting a cigar, or getting a radio station to play a special song, we tried it. We tried, and it must have worked. This is not what people are supposed to do. You don't kill people to teach people that killing people is wrong. I feel sorry for every one of them that has done that, but I admire those who have the courage to stop.
While Pickett served on the execution team in Huntsville, Texas, and Dr. Alt ran the executions in Georgia, Terry and Bax were leading parallel lives in South Carolina. Little did they know that accepting the promotion would set in motion a dark and disturbing journey that would connect them for the rest of their lives.
Terry came in for an interview, and Terry interviewed for the rapid response team, and he was my captain over the rapid response team, so I knew what kind of guy he was, and he basically got the job as the major over the rapid response team.
The first time that I actually went down to the death house, I didn't have to participate in that one. I just simply observed, sort of just witnessed the procedure. Oddly enough, still didn't know how I felt about it. It was very similar to watching a procedure on TV, although I realized this actually involved a human life, so it was more complicated in that aspect.
Well, I think I did a few by myself before Terry ever, because I had done some by myself before Terry ever even came into play.
There was something inside of me that could not let Craig Baxley do the rest by himself. I just wouldn't allow myself to do that.
Well, you couldn't talk about it at work with anybody. The only person I could talk to was Terry about it.
We would just elect to go back to our office area at the Division of Security. There's a little couch right there by the window. We would sit there just for a few minutes, and sometimes for periods of time, we wouldn't say anything at each other. It was just a summing up process.
And I just remember how long it was sitting there with him talking, because it was just, it was like with me, he wanted to go home to his family, and I wanted to go out to a bar.
Obviously, neither one of us had professional counseling training or any skills like that, but we just sort of look at each other and all like that. And in our own minds, we say, are you okay, or something like that.
And because we had no one to talk to but ourselves, so it was just the two of us as executioners that talked about it amongst each other. And
the agency wanted machines. We were both owned and operated by the agency, and that's what they wanted. And throughout the process, unfortunately for me, I learned to be that machine.
When you appoint an executioner, what was your process?
Well, first off is finding somebody who's willing to do that job. I would say about the executioner the same thing I said about anybody that works the executions. If it looked like they were enjoying this job, we were going to find somebody else to take their place. I went to work as an officer, a correctional officer, working at nights at prison when I was a college student here. And then I worked my way up the ranks and eventually became a warden and retired as warden about 11 years ago. I think I went into being the warden and being over the executions there, I guess you could say pretty much sitting on the fence, and I left there the same way. I have no problems with it. If the people of Texas want to have the death penalty, I don't have a problem with that. And if they want to do away with it, I don't have a problem with that either. None of the men I dealt with had any problems with being an executioner. If they did, they never told me, and I never heard it from any of the other fellows or ladies that worked there. They didn't seem to have any more problem doing their job as an executioner than any of the officers had, say, strapping the guy down on the gurney, for instance, or the medical people who insert the IVs.
In the event that the condemned attempts to take his or her own life before their scheduled execution, they are promptly given medical attention until they are cleared as fit to be executed. The drugs used in a lethal injection are changing. However, the executions that Terry and Bax carried out were a 3-drug protocol.
I never had all 3 injections, so I couldn't say I know what it's like. And it's wrong for anybody to say I know what it's like.
An IV line is inserted in the condemned by an EMT. The warden receives a call from the governor, and if there is no stay, the execution commences with the plunging of 7 syringes.
And so I'd never received any training. I didn't know the policies or procedures. It's amazing I didn't end up in one of my own prisons.
In between each drug, a saline solution is pushed, which prevents the deadly chemicals from mixing in the IV lines. The first drug injected is sodium thiopental, a barbiturate intended to induce unconsciousness. Pancuronium bromide is a muscle relaxant that renders the inmate paralyzed and unable to move. The final drug, potassium chloride, stops the heart and induces cardiac arrest. If the first drug administered fails, the inmate is paralyzed, still conscious, while experiencing loss of oxygen and eventually death.
And it's supposed to put him to sleep. It's supposed to freeze his muscles. The potassium, which is to freeze the heart. And it went to work. But what should have put him to sleep didn't work. What should have paralyzed his muscles didn't work. I still have nightmares about that and always will.
I felt strongly, probably because of my background, and that there was some real value in life. On one side of the death chamber is a wall with a window with curtains over it that the witnesses can see in. This first individual went on death row when he was 17. He was now 34. And all the executions I attended, none of them struggled. They went with the officers willingly. There was a metal bracket that went to one of the legs. A wet sponge was placed on top of his head, and then the helmet came down, which is a metal helmet. And then the warden asked the inmate if he had anything he wanted to say. And of the people I executed, all of them were fairly short statements. In this case, he asked for God to forgive him. And I turned to Brad, the electrician behind me, and I said, "Brad, it's time." Brad threw the switch. And from where we were sitting or standing, you could see this tremendous jolt by the inmate as the electricity hit his body. And you realize you just killed a human being. I've been trained to kill people in the Army and went to Korea, but this is different.
Well, there were 4 girls involved with the crime. One girl named April Beverly, who knew my grandmother, told the other 3 girls actually to go knock on the door, and that the lady would probably let them in if they said they wanted to take Bible lessons. She stayed out as a lookout. She was sentenced to 25 years in prison. Denise Thomas, who was a girl accused of hitting not over the head with a vase, was sentenced to 35 years in prison. Karen Quarters and Paula Cooper both handled a knife. The state of Indiana sought the death penalty for both of them. The first girl to go before the judge was Karen Quarters. The judge elected not to give her the death penalty, gave her Indiana's alternative of 60 years in prison. Said the reason he wasn't giving her the death penalty is because she'd been under the influence of a person with a dominating personality. Paula Cooper was 15 years old at the time. She was deemed to be the ringleader. She was a girl who had brought the knife into the home and inflicted the majority of the stab wounds. The family basically supported the death penalty. In fact, my father testified for the prosecution and said it would be a travesty of justice if she didn't get the death penalty. And the judge said, although he was opposed to the death penalty, according to the law of the state of Indiana, he said he had no choice, and he sentenced her to die in the electric chair, and she became the youngest female on death row. And I had no problem with that. Well, there was a large international outcry when Paula Cooper was sentenced to death, especially in Europe. There is no death penalty in Europe. And they were appalled by the fact that out of 22,000 murders that took place in the United States in 1985, that the state of Indiana was going to take a 15-year-old black girl and put her in the electric chair, and they couldn't comprehend that. And when I heard that 40,000 people had signed these petitions, I was amazed that 40,000 people want her to live, because there in Northwest Indiana, everybody wanted her to die, and to die right away. She couldn't die soon enough to make people happy. Just I couldn't believe it was happening, and there was nothing you could do about it. If people have known that my grandmother was going to be killed, they would have been there to have stopped it. But here we know that an individual is going to be killed, and nobody can do anything about it. It just happens.
The premeditated ritual of legal homicide requires a team of men, all with conflicting roles to play. A man of God to bring comfort, a man of rank to maintain order, men trained to protect life, suddenly required to take it. Man versus man becomes man versus himself.
They got blood on their hands. The police are killing us in the street with no death penalty jury.
And I went on the 2 for a tooth, but then it says, vengeance is mine, said God.
Death row inmates in the U.S. typically spend over a decade awaiting their execution. Many, however, have been on death row for over 20 years. Terry and Bax were given their order to execute just a day or two prior. How does one spiritually, psychologically, emotionally prepare when you know you'll be killing the killer?
I would push 3 vials, and then somebody else would push 4 vials, so you wouldn't actually know who was actually, doing the killing type thing.
My actual first one that I actually participated in occurred shortly after, after that one. I just went into it at that particular time, like I knew that I had to be professional. I knew that I had a job to carry out, and at that particular time, it wasn't so much about me, but just carrying out that particular job.
And they did offer, if you want to put a mask on, you can put it on. And the EMTs and the doctors are so scared because they don't want anyone knowing that they're doing it, because basically their job could fire them because it's unethical for them to have anything to do with executions whatsoever.
The space was a fairly mid-sized room, big, huge glass that you can look through. The lights would be dimmed. The visitors would actually have an opportunity to view the body. The inmates is less than just a few feet away. The duty that I had, or Bax and I had, was to simply take the syringe, screw it in, and then do the plunging.
The condemned's laying there, and you can see his chest start rising, and then the heart rate monitor to the left is jumping and doing, and you can see it, and then he pushes the second one in, and it gets a little worse, and it was then the third one, about the third one is normally when he would start flatlining on the third one, and it would jump every now and then, and you could see, we would have inmates in there that were, we had different races that would come in, but they would just turn just white, gray, just a charcoal color. Some of them, they almost look like skeletons that just changed so much.
Because of the position where we were standing, our eyes would meet. So, there are plenty of times when his eyes and my eyes met, and my eyes undoubtedly was the last eyes that he saw on this planet.
Then the coroner would come and then back up, and they would pick up the now deceased inmate and take him to Newberry, South Carolina, where they would do an autopsy. And every single one, it had on the death report, it had murder. Every single one. It said state-assisted homicide, and they tried to get him to change it, to say something different. But it was basically, that's what every single death certificate has on it is homicide.
As executioners, are you responsible for removing the body?
No.
Your job ends when he's dead.
My job ends when he's dead.
Practically every inmate, when they come in on their next to final day, because when we were doing it, they would come in at 6 or 7 o'clock in the morning, and I'd stay with them all day long, and executions were then at midnight. The inmates, the condemned, the human beings, the persons, would be optimistic. Most of them, I can't say all of them, but most of them would be optimistic that somebody was going to give them a stay. And just to tell them, this is the end. And you had to do it by a legal term. Stay is a legal term. There was one that we put him on the gurney at midnight, took him off, put him on, took him off, and finally at 6:20 the next morning, I went to him in the cell and I told him, there will be no stay. They killed him. They hear all these rumors all over the country. You're going to throw up, you're going to vomit this, and you're going to get scared, and you're going to scream, or you're going to holler. They didn't want to do that. Most of these people want to die with dignity. And the next fear is, that for those that had no faith at all, and those are some of the hardest ones, who had nothing to believe. And so you prepare in a different way. And the longer I was with them, the more I was able to see that I had come to death from my own mortality. I'm ready to die. I was in. I wasn't when I first started. But I don't want to die that way. I'm not saying it's painless, because it's not.
We bulldoze trees in prison graveyards to create space for the people we intend to kill. Destroying life to create space for the life we intend to destroy.
The police are killing us, and they have a pension and a job, and they kill us ruthlessly, no matter what our age or our sex.
We know this execution tonight is not going to bring back my husband to me. It's not going to bring our children's father back to them. Our 6 grandchildren's papa back to them. But we do know that the employees of the Department of Corrections and the public in general will be just a little bit safer now.
Good evening. As Attorney General, I want to recognize the men and women of the Department of Corrections for carrying out a sentence that was constitutionally sound and humane.
The execution of inmate Eric Robert was carried out this evening. With all witnesses present, the warden ordered the curtains open.
The history of capital punishment, from hooking a horse to each one of your limbs and pulling people apart, that didn't deter. And we've We've executed people for all sorts of crimes. We used to hang pickpockets in the public square. And while they were hanging those pickpockets were picking the pockets of the people watching the procedure. I mean, it just doesn't work, but it's like we're insisting that it must work.
I sincerely hope that this will help the healing of the Johnson family as well as Robert's other female victims, and that this sentence will better ensure the safety of South Dakota correction officers.
It just feels so hypocritical to me to say we're going to teach people not to kill other people by killing people. I mean, where is there any logic?
When I started there were maybe 30, 40 on death row. By the time we executed 50, it had grown to 300, and by the time we'd executed, 75, it had grown to 400, and then when they got to 500, there was more in prison on death row than were in the beginning.
And most people think, well, it's a lot cheaper to execute somebody. The people condemned to death, it varies in state, but minimum is about $1 million to $3 million.
When people lose schools and law enforcement officials, and the quality of life changes because they spend several $1 million.
California is almost bankrupt. They certainly can't, but they just rejected life without parole and kept the death penalty. The voters did by a very small percentage.
The polls say that 73% of Texans are in favor of executions. Well, 73% of those who've watched executions are not in favor of it. I can tell you that. And I can give you names and places of very intelligent, good-hearted people who've watched an execution and they realize this is not American, and it's not good for the health of anybody.
The inmate, when the curtains were open, appeared to be calm. He raised his head up right away. The drug was administered. He appeared to be clearing his throat, like he was thirsty. He began to make some heavy gasps. When the warden announced the execution and asked him if he had any last words, he made one statement directed to the warden. Then he looked up again and said, "It is done."
Well, basically the state, years ago basically said, okay, we're going to go to lethal injection. So when they went to lethal injection, the ones who were convicted before, when they still had the electric chair, had a choice, lethal injection, electric chair. So most of them choose the lethal injection, but there's still a few that say they want the electric chair for whatever reason, they want the electric chair. Well, this one decided he wanted the electric chair.
For the electric chair, it takes 3 people to actually carry that particular function out. I received a phone call a day or so prior to being told that I was to carry out this particular duty.
Nobody knew how to do it. Nobody knew how to hook it up. They had a electrician that came in and he hooked it up, and he basically he didn't know what he was doing. And
we got down there. Things were pretty much the same. And never done one with this one, never witnessed one, never particularly even seen one carried out on TV. Expected to get some type of orientation about what to do and all like that, and really didn't even know where the buttons was and all like that. It was just that kind of, okay, well, you into this game now and all like that.
There's 3 buttons on the wall, and one of the buttons had a crack down the middle of the button, and just a crack all the way from the ceiling. It was a newer facility, so it was strange. It had a crack all the way running from the ceiling to the floor.
As I understand it, only one of those buttons is active. I have no knowledge whether that's actually true or not, but only one of those buttons is supposed to be active. And then the thing is, okay, well, who gets that button?
Well, they brought in a guy that would later get promoted, and he was a buddy of somebody, and they brought him in, and he just laughed and joked about selling the vials of from the lethal injection on eBay, and he said, I remember him saying, specifically, I want the button with the crack down it because I know that's probably the one with the power,
The warden actually, I believe, activated a switch, which caused a green light to come on. And then once that light comes on, then you have to all three mash the buttons at the same time. One of the last things that he said, once he was in the chair, was he said, I'm so uncomfortable, and all like that. And one of the persons said, well, don't worry, in a couple of minutes, everything's gonna be okay. We turn around and we hit the buttons, and as we turn around, it was just this grimace.
I mean, it was just the worst scene. I mean, his hands locked down and, his head threw back.
And it was just one solid jolt. But the look of grimace on his face was unbelievable. And it's just smelling of flesh that sort of burns, first like a peanut.
And it was, when they took him off, he was basically fused to the chair. I mean, his hands, his veins were just popping out. He was fused to the chair.
It was horrible. And it's a face that once you see the face of death like that, you will never, ever, ever forget it.
You start thinking about it, and it was to the point where I tried to let my higher up know, hey, at least get me on out of here, move me, do something. I love what I'm doing. Let me get out of this. But it went back to, I want you to do it, and that's it. And if you're not going to do it, I'll stick you in the daggone worst prison hole, in this prison here, and you can go over there and rot.
Being a major in psychology and having taught people all along, you got to find a friend. Well, sometimes that friend is just yourself. You just got to talk it out. So I would go home, and I'd sit on the living room floor. I lived right across the street in the chaplain's house, and I would sit down and just start talking into a old reel-to-reel tape recorder. I just put down everything that I had seen, everything I had heard, everything I had felt with the inmates and their families, and then I just put it back in a box and hide it away. Yeah, there's 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 36 here, 36 in another one, and then the other one's about 30 in another one. Because I had, quote, gotten it all out, now I could get back and start it all over again. This is my therapy. After a while, I started having therapy sessions for the executioners and guards and staff. Every Tuesday night after we had them, I'd go over to the hospital, and everybody that wanted, I'd just say, anybody want to show up, show up. In this business, if you don't talk to somebody, you're going to have a problem. And this happens not just to executioners, but it happens to wardens. It happens to other people, like that great captain I had down there with me all the time, and he just had what he called a nervous breakdown. He just snapped. And he quit the prison and lost everything.
All I felt I was I was murdering people for society's revenge. Psychologically, I couldn't deal with that. Still can't deal with it.
Any human being that goes down there and doesn't have some release is going to snap someday. You know, if they keep doing it.
I finally realized I wasn't dealing with it well at all, and got some psychological help from a friend who I trusted.
This is not what people are supposed to do. You don't kill people to teach people that killing people is wrong. You just don't do it. It doesn't work. It doesn't help anybody. There's victims after victim after victim. The victims are all of us.
And then I had another guy that was a boss, and he actually left and came back, and he was an executioner. He committed suicide when he was still employed there, while he was when he was shortly after one of the last executions.
Some of the conversations that he and I and Craig Baxter had together, though, that in talking about the executions, it was painfully clear to me that he was also troubled and bothered by them as well.
He basically wrapped himself up in a blanket at his daddy's pond and shot himself in the head. You know, I just at that point, you know, it just threw me over the edge with everything, and I had to start seeking help, because it was just to the point then I felt like I was going to have a breakdown.
Capital punishment is perhaps the most premeditated murder of all. Bringing killers face to face with each other, blurring the lines of sanity.
I expected to be trained, I expected to be counseled. None of that took place. Taking that plunger and pushing it in sort of set me on a particular course that I wasn't really prepared for. All the ones that I participated in and the ones that I witnessed, I was impressed by the fact that the inmates voluntarily went into the chair. There was no force involved in any of the ones that I recognized. And I did not want this to be about me or anything like that, or to detract anything away from the process. One of the things that I made sure that I did was I took 2 or 3 tablespoons of cough syrup. I didn't want to be teary-eyed, I didn't want to be misty, nor did I want anybody else, you know, to see that and them have to worry about me or focus on me. People were dealing with their own demons at that time.
Yeah, my wife, she knew it. You're not really supposed to tell anybody at all, but my wife knew that I was. So I've lost a lot of people through this process, a lot of them, because of what it turned me into.
When I would go home, I always needed just a little bit of time still. Didn't really want to be asked a whole bunch of questions about it. My wife did not marry a stone statue.
My wife, I mean, she's scared to death of me, you know, and even now, I mean, she knows me, and she'll go to her sisters and stay for the weekend and get away from me. And she knows, and when I say scared to death of me, she just knows how quickly I fly off the handle. And it started then, you know, and it just got progressively worse as time went on.
We are sons, daughters, brothers, sisters, mothers, and fathers.
That your soul no longer may be troubled.
Life manifested from the sacred, born innocent and pure.
My uniform did become my mask. It became a thin line, a thin veil between Major Bracey and Terry Bracey. You know, I no longer could either be strong enough or passionate enough to be either one of them.
Yeah, from the prison system, just the prison system itself, working in the prison system and working with the murderers and the rapists, and just seeing some of the things, it just changed me back then, you know, as a person. And I lost my first wife, which is my children's mother. I still say I lost her to the prison system.
I do believe if you've taken some lives, you are a serial killer. I do believe that. But I also look at a serial killer every day when I look in the mirror. I see a serial killer, and there are times when it becomes unbearable.
I was aware that some members of the team were suffering. I was aware that the warden was suffering. Some handle it with alcohol. I did 5 executions. I couldn't do any more. One inmate who tried to filibuster when we asked his last, would like to have his last words, and I had to go in the death chamber and cut him off. He had raped and killed elderly women. He was a pretty despicable guy. But I still didn't feel any different or any better about executing him. When I realized that I just couldn't do any more, a friend of mine who I had brought into corrections was now head of a large agency in the Justice Department, and I applied. I got the job, and most fortunate thing that happened in my life, I think. I mean, these people, if they weren't being executed, they would be in for life without parole, which I think is a much more appropriate punishment if that's what we're after. The biggest thing to me is I hear all these people about pro-life and that life is sacred, and even right after conception, and yet there are 4 executions. When does life stop being sacred? I haven't figured that out.
I believe in God, yes.
At the time I was going to church a lot. As time went on, that's been since I guess 2003. I hadn't been back to church since, and it's been 10 years, and I was going my whole life.
I would pray shortly before I pushed the needles or the button on every execution that I participated in. I would always pray for forgiveness, and I would sort of mentally question myself. One of the commandments in the Bible says, "Thou shalt not kill."
If the inmate does not die within a certain few minutes, then you have to actually do another set. Well, so after I did the 4, I basically went out, took off the gloves, and there was a bathroom over to the right, and I went to the bathroom and went in the bathroom and kind of got down on my knees and basically prayed.
As I get older, then I realize I don't have as much time as I had even the day before. Then I begin to question my salvation even that much more.
I just felt different from day one, from the first time. I told you I have 2 boys, and I mean, it's just like I went from a doing father to hunting and fishing and living to doing nothing, that kind of thing. And almost at that point, it took me from being a normal person to being like, I felt like God left me. I feel like I'm damned, and it's to the point now that I feel like I'm damned by God, and that I've lost all, even the authority figures. It's like sometimes some of the things I do is just in disbelief to myself.
There was a gentleman that was executed here in this state who professed his innocence, I might add, to the very end, even when he knew that within moments that he would be facing his Creator. One of the statements that he wrote that was read out, and he said that, "I forgive you." And that has stayed with me and touched me to this very, I'll never forget it. I'll never forget it.
I consider back then taking a gun in there and just and shooting every single person in the entire room with me.
After serving 2 decades for the Department of Corrections, the levees of tolerance had finally broken. Enough was enough.
I was the major of the SORT team, you know, and they're saying, you know, basically they're telling me when I went to some of the people, you know, if you're the major of the SORT team, which is a Special Operations Response Team, you have, you know, you're on that team, and you know that you might have to go in and shoot somebody or your team might have to, that has somebody hostage. And I said, well, you know, that's a totally different situation when you're going in doing it out of self-defense or doing it to save somebody's life than doing the executions. You know, I'm just tired of doing the executions. And it was pretty much, you know, well, you're it, and if you don't want to be it, you know, then I'm just going to move you and demote you.
I knew then that I had to make one of the toughest decisions that I had to make, you know, in my entire life. And that was to give up a career that I had both wanted and loved to do. It's being major worth the possibility of sacrificing, you know, my soul.
It's not the fact that I couldn't do it, I did it. It's the fact that it changes you psychologically and changes you into a different person. You know, anybody can do anything, you know, but I was not trained to do it, and it messed me up.
They acknowledged that I was an executioner, but they failed to acknowledge how badly this has affected me and my family, and that's very painful. We were met with cruelty. Well, if you can't do that, you can go back down there. And I was kind of perplexed. You know, why should I have to give up being major just because somebody else wanted me to kill somebody?
You know, that was my career. I didn't want to leave. You know, again, I would be there right now. I was the guy that everybody, you know, the joking guy, the laughing guy that, you know, that everybody is like, you know, hey, you know, here he comes, you know, and he's fun and having a good time. I went from that to the asshole, you know. No, I did not feel liberated. I felt like, you know, that I was made to leave, and you know, and I would be there now had all of this not happened.
The folks didn't believe me, and I remember thinking, you know, if I would have had a broken arm, then I could actually point to them and say, here's my arm. You know, you got to be able to see this.
You got one person on one side that'll come up and slap you, and one want to give you a high five. So that's what's strange. And then one, because you decided you didn't want to do it anymore, is going to call you a punk or worse names because they feel like you left, you know, this position because, you know, you couldn't handle it. You know, well, it's not that I couldn't handle it. It's that I couldn't handle what it turned me into. It gave me a feeling of to authority, to just everything. It's just basically, you know, fuck you.
The enthusiasm and support for the death penalty is slowly and steadily on the decline.
If we want to change the behavior, we have to teach them to love each other, not to kill each other. 18 other states that have abolished the death penalty. Yet matters. No more. No more. No more. No more. Sooner or later.
It was a day I'll never forget. It was November 2nd, 1986. I was at work at Bethlehem Steel, where I'd been employed as an overhead crane operator for about 20 years at that point. And I had some free time up in the crane. There was no work to do. And I began reflecting on my grandmother's life and on her death. And I became convinced beyond a shadow of a doubt that my grandmother had been appalled by the fact that this girl's on death row, the state of Indiana was going to kill her, and that so many people were anxious to see her die. I knew that's not how she was. I was convinced she would have had love and compassion. I felt she wanted someone else in my family to have that same sort of love and compassion. In fact, I actually pictured her in tears of love and compassion. I felt she wanted me to have that same sort of love and compassion. I didn't have a bit because Nana had been very brutally and heinously murdered. But so convinced that's what she would have wanted, I begged my God to give me love and compassion for Paula Cooper and her family, and do that on behalf of my grandmother. It was just a short prayer, but immediately I began to think, well, I could tell this girl about my grandmother. I could write her a letter, tell her the kind of person that my grandmother was. I knew that not have been more interested in somebody from our family or somebody from our church or somebody from our community want to try to continue to share that faith rather than being so interested in seeing her put to death. And when I realized that I wanted to try to help that girl, I learned the most important lesson of my life. And that was about the healing power of forgiveness, because when my heart was touched with compassion, forgiveness took place. And it brought a tremendous healing. That from that moment on, whenever I think about Nana again, I no longer picture how she died, but I would picture how she lived and what she stood for and what she believed in, and a beautiful, wonderful person she was. It was a tremendous healing took part inside of me. I call it a miracle. Well, I knew I had coworkers, friends, members of the family weren't going to understand why I no longer want her to die, but I wanted to try to help her, but I knew that I was doing the right thing. When I left work that night and I walked down the crane stairs, I knew that my life was going to be different. I knew it wouldn't be the same. I felt like I was a man with a mission. It became universal because at that point, there were 33 juveniles on death row in the United States. I began to pray for all 33 juveniles who were on death row and praying for love and compassion for them, and I realized I didn't want any of them to die either. There were 2,500 people on death row throughout the country. I began to pray for them, love and compassion for all the death row inmates, and I realized I didn't want them to die either. Because if you can get people to believe that the answer is love and compassion for all humanity, the death penalty is not even an argument.
And again, four executioners, two of us serious problems. One is committed suicide, killed himself, and the other one is still there, but what mental condition or where he is now with his life, I'm not sure. But out of four, three, one dead and two more that are seriously having problems the rest of their lives.
The agency that I would have given my life for, I was prepared to literally give my life for. If the situation required me going in and getting an inmate and getting hurt during the process, I would have gladly done that. Failed to recognize that I also suffered. I
just felt like that the people have the right to know it's something that's been cloaked in secrecy for years and years and years. And right now, I mean, there's no, there might be one or two other out there that would come out and say that they were executioners or that come out and say that they are, but there's because it's so condemning. But I just wanted, it to get out, and people to understand what people go through and what this process has been.
I also like when people that's supposed to do good, they do good.
Who makes this guy is okay for me to kill? There's people now that have done much worse that are not even in prison than some of these people that have been executed because of money, because of race, and because of power.
You can put on a nice suit and still be a serial killer. You can even have a smile on your face and still cry on the inside.
But I know when I hear of executions throughout the nation that I feel for everybody involved.
What do you hope for yourself?
Peace. I hope peace. And I hope that I can actually maybe inspire a few other people that have similar experience to this to go out and get the help that they need as well.
A day, 30 a day, kill themselves in the United States from PTSD.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America.
They're about to commit the crime. Come on up. Let's look them in the eye, please.
As our collective human consciousness continues to expand, perhaps the dividing lines and opposition that man has created will continue to dissolve.
They said that if we allow them to win this lawsuit, that other executioners in other states are going to come out and say the same thing. And so, we're South Carolina, and it was to the point whereas, some of the judges and all were talked to.
I have received counseling for the past several years, and that's how I make it on a daily basis.
It's changed my life completely. I'm diagnosed with PTSD, severe PTSD. I've got generalized anxiety disorder. I've got depression, and I'm on 6 different type of medications. I used to fish. At the time, I was fishing, probably a couple times a week with my children, and they're big fishermen, and I used to hunt all the time. I go maybe once a year now. I fish once a year, but I just can't get back into doing anything that I was doing.
I wonder, could I have been just a little bit stronger, and maybe hold on just a little bit more? I know the answer to that in my spirit is no, but I just wonder sometimes why I wasn't strong enough.
At one point, I tried to commit suicide with a gun. I was going to shoot myself, and basically I shot the gun in the house. And my wife at the time was downstairs, and she thought I had killed myself, but I actually shot into the bed at the time.
I want to start the process of becoming whole again, and becoming a person prior to me, before the executions and all. And it's a struggle. And there are times when I make a step forward and almost 2 backwards. And that's something personally that I need to work on for myself and for my family.
It's not that a soldier cannot handle fighting in a war in Iraq. When he comes back, it's that he couldn't handle what it turned him into. He was over in Iraq, he fought in Iraq, and he did for our country. He comes back and he can't handle the person that it's turned him into.
Because you do it over and over again every day to your spirit. You do it over and over again every day in your mind. Even if it's a situation that you should be happy about, but you can't. Because while everybody else might be enjoying something, then you sit down at the death house.
The only thing that has kept me from turning into, one of these people that you see on the news and is I've gone. I sought out help. I got good professional help, which would never would have never happened had I had it to begin with, and counseled and everything to begin with, and medication and my doctors. And my wife and my children. That's the only reason that I have not, done any of the things, that I, in my mind, have wanted to do.
Have you forgiven yourself?
I struggle with that daily. I believe in the Bible and I believe in forgiveness. I'm just not sure whether I'm the one that's going to forgive myself or not.
It is not a job. I didn't have a job. I had a ministry. And that's a whole lot different. If you're going to kill somebody just because that's what you get paid for, you're missing the whole point of living up on this earth.
I don't live with it every moment now. But things still trigger it. I still have nightmares on occasion. Unless you're involved in it and have experienced it, nobody can quite understand what you're going through.
I think all of us who are involved in it, bear not a responsibility for the death, but a responsibility for the life.
Colonel Lowe?
Yes?
Mickey? The execution is now in progress. When it first surge entered his body, he stiffened and I heard a pop. He is still at this time sitting there with clenched fists with no other movement.
Any reaction from the witnesses?
They're just sitting there staring into the execution chamber.
I'm still looking through that glass. I'm still in my mind going through the emotions of plunging that plunger or matching that button for the electric chair.
We don't know with the system as far as who is guilty and who is not guilty. And I tell my children this, I tell my wife this, they just don't understand the way it makes you feel.
What I would like is to live in a more civilized society who treat people with respect. But hopefully, we have evolved.
They have removed the hood, the face hood, and are in the process now of taking or removing the headset.
You know, we human beings are united as people, and the people that you're killing are people. And they're really somebody's daughter or husband or wife or whatever it is that's got to suffer for what you've done.
I want to be back to 50 to 60 to 70% of what I used to be. And that's what I wish for Terry. But he's not, and he won't be. It's just the way it is.
I'm just concerned that inside of me too, you know, that monster is still there.
The stretcher has been brought in to place the inmate's body on once they have removed him from the chair.
Anybody, for lack of a better term, comes to see the light about what an execution really is. I support those people, and I admire anybody who's willing to come up and say, we're going to have a stay. In fact, we're going to have permanent stays. It's not going to be existent anymore. It's going to take a while. But one of these days, it'll be gone.
The stress eats us both up, so, you know, how long we live, time will tell, but I think we'll be, you know, together until we both die.
There are countless paths to the top of the mountain and teachers to be found in unexpected places along the way. Knowing these men, who by society's own definition are serial killers, has delivered profound examples of courage, hope, and possibility. Every moment holds a choice. In every choice, an opportunity. Guided by the voices within, we choose.
Kill me soft, kill me off, kill me always at random. All I want is a sad song. Vision's gone, vision's gone, vision's gone, I see nothing. Time is wrong, I'm wrong, my wind is long when I'm talking. I'm as uninformed as the informant who informed me. I can see clarity blurry from where we are looking. I got a machine that breathes gasoline, takes you and me through the country.
Finally dancing in the house.